Over leftover holiday roast and stale coffee on the morning of December 26th, my father announced he was selling the family business. He looked at me as if he still had the power to determine my net worth and said, "And you won't be seeing a dime of it." My sister Blair smirked before I could even open my mouth. I knew that smile all too well. It was her signature look, the one she wore every time our father chose her and left me out in the cold. I just asked, "Who's buying it?" My father answered, as if he had rehearsed the line in the mirror. "An acquisition vehicle from River Capital Investments. They're paying $12 million." That was when I laughed. Not out of joy, but out of sheer exhaustion. That company is mine. Nobody touched their plates after that. My name is Sloane Sterling, and I grew up in a family where everything looked immaculate from the outside. We lived in a sprawling Tudor estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of mansion designed so perfectly that no one ever asks what goes on behind closed doors. My father, Vance Sterling, was the founder and majority owner of Sterling Wealth Management, an investment and advisory firm he had built on the bones of my grandfather's money. Since we were little girls, Blair and I heard the same promise. Someday, this firm will belong to you both. But everyone knew it didn't belong to the two of us. It belonged to Blair. Blair was 3 years older, striking, painfully confident, and quick to smile whenever it served her agenda. My father looked at her as if she walked on water. If she was late to a meeting, she was burned out. If I was late, I was unprofessional. My mother, Corinne, rarely intervened. She claimed it was to keep the peace. More often than not, I was the one paying the price for that peace. When Blair graduated from her Ivy League university, my father custom-built an executive role for her. A corner office with a skyline view, a dedicated assistant, and instant access to board meetings where others had spent decades trying to get a seat. In less than 2 years, he named her CEO. In reality, the position had always been hers. 3 years later, I finished my finance degree and entered the firm not as an heir and certainly not as a partner. I came in as a junior portfolio manager, assigned a cramped cubicle and the toxic accounts no one else wanted to touch. I arrived before dawn, left long after dark, proofread pitch decks, and handled the most volatile clients. I naively believed that if I just did enough, someday, they would take me seriously. After a year of grinding, I asked for a meeting with my father. "I want to review my trajectory here," I told him in his mahogany-paneled office. He didn't even look up from his monitor. "What about it?" "I've exceeded every metric. I believe I'm ready to take on more responsibility." He signed a document and barely glanced my way. "You have a long way to go, Sloane. I work more than 60 hours a week, then work smarter. It's not about warming a chair all day. It's about demonstrating market intuition." I bit my tongue. I wanted to tell him that intuition was exactly what I was trying to show. I wanted to point out that he never demanded the same from Blair. But in my family, if I spoke up, I was complaining. If Blair spoke up, she was showing leadership. A few months later, we had our quarterly strategy meeting. It was the same old song and dance. Municipal bonds, real estate trusts, blue chip stocks, conservative mutual funds. Everything safe, everything stagnant. That morning, I brought a proposal I had been meticulously researching for weeks. It wasn't a whim. I had analyzed the white papers, modeled the risk profiles, and built comprehensive projections. When it was my turn, I connected my laptop to the projector. "I want to propose we allocate a fractional percentage of our alternative asset capital to Bitcoin," I said. "Not a massive hedge, a strictly capped position to understand the ecosystem and get in early." Blair let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Bitcoin, are you serious?" I held my ground. The underlying blockchain technology has massive potential. There's volatility, absolutely, but the upside asymmetry is unprecedented. If we wait until Wall Street is comfortable with it, we'll be buying at the top. My father leaned back in his leather chair. "Sloane, please. It's not a blind gamble, it's diversification. The market is shifting, and we are stagnating." Blair crossed her arms. "Dad, this is embarrassing. Our high net worth clients trust us because we are institutional and serious, not because we play with imaginary internet tokens." "I'm not playing. I'm proposing a mathematically calculated position." My father hit a button on the remote, killing the projector. "That's enough." My face flushed hot. "Dad, I didn't even finish the risk-adjusted return slide. There's no need. This lacks any fundamental basis for a firm of our caliber." "Yes, it does. If you would just read the executive summary, you'd see I'm not exposing the core portfolio. I'm saying we need to look at the next decade, not the last one. Blair leaned over the conference table. No, Sloan. What you're demonstrating is that you fundamentally do not understand this industry. That's incredibly unfair. What would be fair is if you stopped wasting our C-suite's time. There were other senior executives in the room, men and women who relied on my financial modeling. None of them said a word. Blair looked at my father. Honestly, if she thinks this constitutes an investment strategy, she doesn't belong in this building. My father didn't hesitate. She's right. At first, I thought the acoustics in the room had played a trick on me. What? He folded his hands on the table. Sloan, this just validates what we've been observing. You aren't a fit for Sterling Wealth. Are you firing me? Don't make a scene. I looked at my mother. She was sitting at the far end of the table, her hands neatly folded over her Birkin bag. She was the one who always preached that family must protect family. I foolishly thought, just this once, she might speak up. My mother lowered her gaze to the mahogany wood and murmured, I think your father is right, sweetie. Blair delivered the final blow without blinking and withhold her performance. Bonus. Her severance will be more than enough compensation for leaving quietly. I looked around the room. My father, my mother, my sister, and the executives, who were suddenly fascinated by the blank legal pads in front of them. I had imagined 100 ways I might fail in this industry. I never imagined my own. Blood would escort me out of a boardroom like a corporate liability. I stood up. Fine. I'm out. My father had corporate counsel draft a separation agreement. It wasn't standard. Severance. It was a golden parachute wrapped in ironclad non-disclosures, non-disparagement clauses, and a waiver of any future claims to the firm. It was for $150,000. It was a lot of cash for a 20-something. It was also an instinctive, elegant way of telling me to never come back. I signed it. I packed my desk, left my keycard on the keyboard, and walked out. I left the Northeast entirely. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. I didn't want to run in the same Greenwich circles or rely on the Sterling name. I rented a modest one-bedroom apartment. I got a job as an analyst at a quiet boutique wealth management firm where, for the first time in my life, partners listened to my market breakdowns without asking if my father had approved them. I used a small chunk of the severance for a down payment on a very basic condo. 2 small bedrooms, a galley kitchen, a view of a parking garage. Nothing to brag about, but it was mine. I didn't invest the rest of the money blindly or out of spite. I kept a 6-month emergency fund, and over the next year, I dollar-cost averaged into Bitcoin. Back then, it was trading for a few dollars, widely dismissed as a dark web novelty. I was terrified too. I wasn't a prophet or a financial messiah. I had simply run the models, weighed the asymmetrical upside, and accepted that I might lose it all. But my gut told me there was a paradigm shift happening. The first year, nothing crazy happened. I didn't sell. I just focused on my career. I was promoted to senior portfolio manager and started handling 8-figure accounts. I learned to look clients in the eye and command a room, without hiding behind my family's legacy. It took nearly 5 years before that initial investment altered the trajectory of my life. When Bitcoin's market cap began its parabolic ascent, I assumed it was a bubble. But then the adoption floor held. The asset class my family had publicly mocked multiplied until the numbers in my cold storage wallet gave me insomnia. I liquidated a calculated percentage near the peak of a major bull run, diversified into traditional assets, and kept a core holding. Between the realized gains and the remaining crypto, my net worth had crossed into the tens of millions of dollars. I remember the night it really hit me. I was sitting at my kitchen island in Charlotte, a mug of lukewarm coffee next to my laptop. I refreshed the balances. I didn't scream. I didn't pop champagne. I sat perfectly still, trying to process the fact that the hush money my father had paid to exile me had grown into a fortune that dwarfed everything he had built in his entire life. I didn't move a single dollar without retaining top-tier CPA and legal counsel. I paid my capital gains taxes, documented every transaction trail, and established a bulletproof corporate structure. If this wealth was going to define my future, there could be no shadows on it. With a portion of the capital, I founded my own private equity and venture firm. I refused to run it the way my father ran his. Sterling Wealth Management survived on fear. Fear of losing, fear of evolving, fear of admitting the world was passing them by. I wanted to fund the future. I aggressively targeted AI, startups, fintech infrastructure, and hungry young founders with brilliant white papers. I also refused to use my surname. I called it River Capital Investments. River, was the name of a scruffy terrier mix I had rescued from a shelter shortly after, arriving in Charlotte. Stubborn and fiercely loyal, he had kept me company through the darkest, loneliest nights of my exile. Over the next 7 years, River Capital exploded. We took losses on some startups, but our unicorns went public or got acquired. We were early on. Artificial intelligence anchored major funding rounds, and soon, River Capital was being profiled in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. I wasn't Vance, Sterling's disappointment of a daughter anymore. I was Sloane Sterling, managing partner of a firm commanding billions in proprietary and LP capital. We eventually opened an office on Park Avenue, and for 12 years, I never called my family. Not for Thanksgiving, not for birthdays. They had made it crystal clear there was no seat at the table for me. I stopped trying to pull up a chair. In early December 2024, 12 years after I walked out of that boardroom, I was in my Park Avenue office reviewing Q3 earnings when my chief of staff knocked on the glass. "Sloane, there's an SEC filing regarding your father's firm you need to look at." I hadn't tracked Sterling Wealth in a decade, initially because it hurt, later because I genuinely didn't care. But I opened the digital dossier. Sterling Wealth Management was bleeding out. I scrolled through the pages in disbelief. Defaulted credit lines, massive. Client outflows, margin calls, distressed asset liquidation, just to make payroll. The empire my father used to parade around the country club was running on fumes. I didn't feel vindicated, I was just baffled. How do you incinerate a money printing machine? I ordered a covert due diligence sweep. Financials, debt structures, vendor, contracts, client retention rates, everything. A week later, my acquisitions team handed me the post-mortem. It was worse than the public filings. The firm had been operating in the red for 3 straight years. My father had stubbornly clung to his outdated 1990s playbook. While the rest of the financial world pivoted to private credit, ESG, and tech-driven wealth generation, he acted like the internet was a passing fad. And Blair was still CEO. According to the internal metrics, she rarely logged hours, but drained the corporate accounts dry. Her Instagram painted the rest of the picture. First-class flights to street barts, month-long rentals in Aspen, VIP, tables in Miami, shopping sprees at Bergdorf Goodman. The ship was sinking, and Blair was ripping the copper wire out of the walls to buy designer shoes. I called my head of M&A. "I want to acquire Sterling Wealth Management." He looked at me carefully. "Sloane, respectfully. It's a toxic asset. Financially, it's a crater. I know it still holds some legacy licenses, a broker-dealer framework, and a few institutional clients we can migrate. If we wait until Chapter 11, we can buy the licensing for pennies. I'm not waiting. Can I ask why? Because it's blood. But structurally, if we strip out the bloated management, fold the AUM into River Capital, and rebrand it, it breaks even in year 2. He didn't push it. 2 days later, he brought me the valuation. Enterprise. Value is hovering around $8 million, assuming no hidden radioactive debt. We'd need to structure it with massive escrow holdbacks for liabilities. Offer them $12 million. He blinked. That's a 50% premium on a dying company. I know, draft it. I didn't want them claiming I was a corporate vulture preying on their ruin. I wanted the offer to be undeniably generous, so pristine that no one could accuse me of foul play. My name wasn't anywhere near the letter of intent. We routed the acquisition through a Delaware shell company entirely owned by River Capital. We didn't hide anything illegally. The ultimate beneficial owner was listed in the deep annexes of the contract, but I knew Vance Sterling. He never read past the executive summary if the check had enough zeros. His legal team knew the buyer was River Capital. They just had no idea who owned River Capital. Vance had spent a lifetime convinced I was incompetent. He wasn't going to suddenly start Googling my name when he was desperate for a bailout. Over the next month, the lawyers audited contracts, liabilities, and client lists. We embedded brutal penalty clauses for backing out of the deal. The final closing date was set for the first week of January. And then Christmas arrived. For the first time in over a decade, I drove back to the Greenwich estate. They hadn't invited me. I doubt they even had my current cell phone number, but I wanted to be in the room when the illusion finally shattered. I drove up from Manhattan on Christmas morning. The Merritt Parkway was empty. I parked my SUV in the sprawling circular driveway. My mother opened the door. It took her a full 5 seconds to compute the face. Looking back at her, "Sloane? Merry Christmas, Mom. Is it really you?" I didn't wait for an invitation. I stepped past her into the foyer. The house Smelled of expensive pine, catered tenderloin, and old money. Everything was exactly the same. The oil paintings, the Persian rugs, the grand staircase. From the formal dining room, Blair looked up. She was sitting with my father, A, and a man I assumed was her husband, Preston. He froze with a fork halfway to his mouth. Blair stared at me as if I were a trespasser. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "I thought I'd visit my family for the holidays." Blair let out a dry, venomous laugh. How incredibly convenient. My father stood up slowly. He had aged significantly, his posture heavily bowed. "We weren't expecting you," he said. I gathered that. My mother hovered nervously in the doorway. "Sit down, sweetie. Let me get you a plate." "I'm not hungry, Mom." Blair looked me up and down, taking in my understated clothes. "I'm sure you read the news that Dad is selling the firm." I heard whispers. "And you drove all the way up here to beg for a slice of the pie?" "No," I replied evenly. Blair smirked. "Good, because I'm telling you right now, you get nothing. You abandoned this family 12 years ago. You don't get to crawl back when there's a payout." "I didn't abandon anyone. You fired me." My father's jaw tightened. "That is ancient history." Blair set her crystal glass down. Dad just brokered a masterclass exit. $12 million. My father held my gaze, his chest puffing out slightly. "I'm selling the firm, Sloan. And Blair is right. You aren't entitled to a single cent." There it was. A dozen years later, and he was still talking to me as if my existence depended on his charity. "Who's the buyer?" I asked. "An acquisition wing of River Capital Investments." Blair said the name slowly, as if speaking to a toddler. "I highly doubt you run in those circles. They're heavy hitters." I couldn't help it. The laugh slipped out. Short, sharp, devoid of humor. "What exactly is so funny?" Blair demanded. "River Capital Investments. That's my firm." The silence that fell over the dining room was absolute. My mother stopped, breathing. My father went completely rigid. Blair's husband awkwardly lowered, his eyes to his plate. Blair stared at me, her brain violently rejecting the data. "That's not funny. Sloan. It's not a joke." I reached into my wool coat, pulled out a matte black business card, and slid it across the mahogany table toward my father. "Sloan Sterling, founder and chief executive officer, River Capital Investments." My father picked it up with trembling fingers. The blood rushed to his face, turning it a dark crimson. You orchestrated this. You bought my company out from under me. I bought a distressed asset at a highly generous premium. You did this to humiliate me. You did that yourself, Dad. The balance sheets don't lie." Blair shot out of her chair. "This is a bluff. You do not own a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. Check your email, Blair. Your own corporate counsel spent the last 4 weeks vetting my LLC. If it were a bluff, your lawyers would be guilty of malpractice." My father slammed the business card onto the table. "The deal is off. I'm not selling to you. You can try," I said softly. "But you signed a binding LOI with a massive breakup fee. Terminating the contract now will bankrupt you in legal fees and trigger immediate loan defaults. Are you threatening your own father?" I'm reminding the counterparty of the terms he legally agreed to. Blair pointed a manicured finger at me. "You have always been so intensely jealous of me. You couldn't stand that I got the firm, so you scrounged up debt to try and buy it. The firm you drove into the ground is currently valued at roughly $8 million. I'm paying $12 million because I didn't want the SEC digging into the Sterling name. And as for debt, I'm acquiring it in cash. My personal net worth crossed $250 million a while ago. River Capital manages billions." No one spoke. My mother looked like she might faint. My father collapsed back into his chair as if someone had cut his strings. Blair's husband slowly placed his phone face down on the table, wishing he were invisible. "The closing date is next week," I said, buttoning my coat. "Before you try to play hardball, I strongly suggest you read the penalty clauses your lawyers." Rubber stamped. "Have a Merry Christmas." I walked out. As I reached the front door, I heard my mother whisper my name, but I didn't stop. For the next week, my phone battery was constantly drained. My mother called. First, then my father, then unknown numbers, frantic text messages, and voicemails. Blair sent one email. "We can restructure this. You inject the $12 million for a 40% equity stake. I remain CEO, we co-manage, and everyone wins." I replied with one sentence. "I am buying the entire entity, or I execute the breach of contract penalties." We closed the deal in a high-rise conference room in Manhattan. My father signed the final transfer documents with a face carved out of stone. Blair glared at me. The entire time, My mother sat in the corner staring at the floor. When the final notary stamp hit the paper, Sterling Wealth Management ceased to exist as an independent entity. Before leaving the room, Blair marched up to me. I expect to retain my title. During the transition, the board meets tomorrow to discuss my compensation package. I am still the chief executive officer. Until tomorrow, I replied. The next morning, I walked into the Sterling Wealth boardroom. I knew the room. Well, it was the exact room where I had been humiliated and discarded. The remaining board members were seated around the table. Many of them were the same men who had silently watched my father fire me. Blair sat at the head of the table, wearing a Chanel suit, trying desperately to project authority. My parents were sitting in the gallery seats. They no longer had voting rights, but as founders, they were permitted to observe. I asked my IT director to fire up the projector. "Good morning," I said, standing where my father once stood. As the new majority shareholder, my team has completed a forensic audit of the operating accounts. Today, our only agenda item is the performance of the CEO. I clicked to the first slide. These are the corporate travel and entertainment expenses for the last 36 months. Blair, your discretionary spending increased by 40% year over year while AUM dropped by 20%. I was doing aggressive client outreach, Blair snapped. Some of it, yes. Most of it, no. I clicked to the next slide. First class. Flights to Aspen, St. Bart's, and the Maldives. 5-star luxury resorts. Categorized as strategic offsites. Dinner receipts averaging $4,000 with zero corresponding client ROI data. Blair flushed deep red. That is how you do business with ultra-high net worth individuals. Not that you would know. You don't do business with ultra-high net worth individuals using money from a firm that is actively defaulting on its credit lines. I clicked to the third slide. Personal expenditures run through the corporate card. Designer wardrobes. From Bergdorf Goodman, luxury handbags, private spa retreats coded as executive. Coaching. One of the older board members squinted at the printouts in front of him. Sloan, are these figures verified? By 2 independent accounting firms. We have the wire transfers, the receipts, and the authorizations Blair signed herself. Blair slammed her hands on the table and stood up. This is a witch hunt. You're manipulating data to get revenge? It's not a witch hunt, Blair. It's a fiduciary audit. You used client fees and company credit to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford. My father stood up from the gallery. Sloan, surely we can handle this quietly, in private. I looked dead at him. When you fired me, you didn't do it in private. The boardroom went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the HVAC system. I am proposing a motion to terminate Blair Sterling as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately, for gross negligence and misappropriation of corporate funds. Legal will determine if we pursue civil restitution for the personal expenses. Everything will be on the official record. One board member raised his hand, then another. Within 10 seconds, it was a unanimous vote. My parents watched it happen. Just like 12 years ago, they said absolutely. Nothing to defend the daughter being fired. Blair shoved her chair back violently. It crashed to the floor. "I hate you," she hissed. "You have always wanted to destroy me." "I didn't forge your expense reports, Blair. I just turned the lights on." She stormed out, slamming the heavy glass door behind her. My parents scrambled out of the gallery to follow her. But before leaving, my father stopped at the threshold. "You publicly executed your own sister," he said, his voice shaking. "She stole from the company, Dad. I didn't force her to do that. She is your sister, and I was your daughter." He didn't have an answer for that. He walked away. Over the next few months, I gutted Sterling Wealth Management. I fired the bloated C-suite, renegotiated vendor contracts, and shut down toxic vanity projects. We migrated their remaining solid clients into River Capital tech-forward infrastructure. Within 90 days, the bleeding stopped. It wasn't wildly profitable yet, but it was no longer burning cash. My parents kept trying to contact me. Letters, voicemails, emails from my mother. Initially, I ignored them. Eventually, the exhaustion outweighed the animative anger. I agreed to meet them at a quiet, generic Panera Bread in Stamford neutral territory, far away from lawyers and mahogany tables. When they walked in, they looked frail. My father wore a faded sweater. My mother didn't have a single piece of designer jewelry on. They sat down across from me with the nervous energy of people asking for a loan. "We need to talk about the acquisition money," my father said quietly. "I'm listening." "The $12 million. We gave half of it to Blair. We felt it was fair, given her time at the company." "Okay." My mother gripped her paper coffee cup. "The problem is, Preston, her husband, He had debts. What kind of debts? My father stared at the table. Sports betting, private loans, margin calls. It was much, much worse than Blair knew. She used her half to wipe out his bookies and lenders. And I had leveraged the house. I took out 3 mortgages on the Greenwich estate to keep the firm afloat these past 2 years. So the money is gone. We have a little over $1 million left, my mother said quickly. But we can't carry the property taxes or the mortgage on the house. You're going to have to sell the estate. My father's head snapped up. You say that like it means nothing. That house is our legacy. It's our entire life. It's a piece of real estate you can't afford, Dad. It's basic math. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Sloan, we know we made terrible mistakes. You fired me in front of the entire board. Blair demanded you steal my bonus. And you agreed. You, Mom, sat there and nodded. You threw me out like garbage. My father swallowed hard. We were wrong. Yes, you were. And now we are asking for your help. I can help you manage the capital you have left. I won't write you a blank check to save a mansion, but I can put your remaining $1 million into a low-risk dividend portfolio that will generate enough yield for you to live comfortably. My father let out a bitter scoff. We don't need a financial advisor, Sloan. We need actual support. That is actual support. That is me acting as a fiduciary for my parents. We are your family. After everything, we are your parents. My mother reached across the table. Sloan, please. I looked at them. For over a decade, I had fantasized about this exact moment. Them begging for a lifeline and me holding all the power, finally able to drop the hammer and walk away. I thought it would feel euphoric. It didn't. It just felt profoundly sad. Sell the Greenwich house, I told them. Move somewhere cheaper. Send the remaining $1.2 million to my firm. My team will structure it standard, just like any other client. My father stood up abruptly. So you're going to let us lose the house? I'm giving you a realistic survival plan. Take it or leave it. They left angry. I didn't hear from them for 3 months. Then, one afternoon, my lead wealth manager walked into my office. Sloan, your parents contacted Intake. They want to open an account with $1.2 million intake, liquid cash. They sold the house? Yes. Sold the estate, cleared the mortgages and the bridge loans. This is what's left. Set them up with a standard conservative growth portfolio, same fee structure as everyone else. Are you sure? Standard fees? They're your parents. Exactly. No special penalties, no special favors. My team built them a rock-solid, boring portfolio that paid out reliable monthly dividends. My parents used the cash from the house sale to buy a modest 3-bedroom condo down in Charlotte, North Carolina. Ironically, the exact city where I had built my independence. With the dividends from the $1.2 million, they could live comfortably, but without the country club memberships or European vacations. For the first time in his life, my father didn't demand to speak to the manager. He just signed the DocuSign and accepted the yield. Through the grapevine, I heard Blair gave Preston an ultimatum. He checked into a rehab facility for gambling addiction. It was a messy, brutal year for them. More hidden debts surfaced, but Blair managed to land a job at a mid-sized marketing agency. Not as a CEO, as a senior account manager. She had a boss, KPIs, and a strict 9-to-5 schedule. Part of me pitied her. Another part of me knew it was the exact medicine she needed, learning what it actually takes to earn a paycheck when your last name doesn't shield you. 6 months after they moved to Charlotte, my mother called me. Sloan, I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For treating us fairly. You didn't give us VIP treatment, but you didn't let us starve in the street either. I stared out the glass of my Park Avenue office. You don't need to thank me for basic decency. Yes, I do. Not after what we did to you. She paused, her voice cracking over. The line. I knew it was wrong, Sloan. I knew it that day in the boardroom. And I sat there like a coward. I swallowed the lump in my throat. It helps to hear you say that, Mom. Your father and I, we can never undo those years. But I am so desperately ashamed that it took me this long to tell you how incredibly proud I am of the woman you became. Thank you. We should have listened to you. It was the closest thing to a genuine, unvarnished apology I had ever heard from her. Would you ever consider coming? Down to visit us? Not for portfolios or contracts. Just to see us? I looked at my calendar. It was packed with pitch meetings and quarterly reviews. But the real roadblock wasn't my schedule. It was the 12-year wall I had built around my heart. Maybe, I said. Let me look at flights. That's more than enough for now. Thank you, sweetie. When I hung up, I stood by the window for a long time. I had built an empire, entirely out of the bricks of my family's rejection. I had conquered my father's company and stripped my sister of her unearned crown. But it didn't feel like a victory lap. It just felt like a heavy, exhausted chapter of my life finally closing. 2 years later, River Capital was an absolute juggernaut. Sterling wealth. Management had been fully absorbed and rebranded, operating as our highly profitable legacy wealth division. One Tuesday morning, my assistant buzzed my intercom. Sloan, your mother is in the lobby. She doesn't have an appointment. My parents and I spoke maybe once a month now, usually brief calls about their health, the North Carolina weather, or their account performance. Send her in. My mother walked in looking nervous. She was wearing a plain cardigan and slacks. She no longer carried herself like a woman whose worth was tied to the logo on her handbag. I'm sorry to drop in unannounced, she said. Is Dad okay? Oh, he's fine. He's golfing at the public course. We're doing better than we have in years. I actually flew up because I wanted to talk to you about Blair. My shoulders immediately tensed. What about her? She and Preston have been in marriage counseling for a year. He's 18, months clean from the betting. She's still at the agency, and she just got promoted to director. Honestly, she's working harder than she ever has. Good for her. She wants to talk to you, Sloan. She wants to genuinely apologize. I don't think that's a good idea, Mom. I understand why you'd say that. Mom, Blair laughed in my face. She demanded Dad strip my bonus. She danced on. My grave while you all watched. My mother looked down at her sensible shoes. I know, and I know I was. Complicit. The silence stretched between us. Why now? I finally asked. Because I think the fog has finally lifted for her, being stripped of the money. And the title forced her to look in the mirror. I'm not making excuses for her, but I do believe she's changed. And I think we've all lost enough decades to... Brede. I didn't answer right away. Half of me wanted to keep that door dead-bolted. Forever. The other half was just so tired of carrying the resentment. I'll think about it, I said. A few weeks later, I flew down to Charlotte. I agreed to meet Blair at a quiet, independent coffee shop halfway between her office and my parents' condo. I arrived first and ordered a black drip coffee. When the bell above the door chimed, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked entirely different. No heavy contouring, no designer labels, just a pair of well-worn jeans, a simple blouse, and her hair pulled back in a claw clip. She sat down across from me. Thank you for letting me come. Hello, Blair. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I was a monster to you. I raised an eyebrow. I hadn't expected her to lead with that. Yes, you were. And not just on the day I got fired. I know. She stared into her coffee. I don't know how to say this without making myself sound even more pathetic, but I always knew you saw the market. In a way I couldn't comprehend. I sat quietly, letting her do the work. I had the corner office, the title, and Dad's blind loyalty. But you were the one actually doing the math. I spent every day terrified someone would realize I was just playing dress up. She took a shaky breath. That day in the boardroom, when you pitched the Bitcoin strategy, I knew it wasn't a joke. I had read the Bloomberg pieces. I knew it was the future. Then why did you nuke the pitch? Because if Dad actually listened to you, it would prove you were the visionary. And I was just the mascot. Her voice cracked. I needed to be the golden child, and your idea threatened to shatter that illusion. So I decided it was better to have you thrown out? You assassinated my career because of your own imposter syndrome, I stated, the words hanging heavy in the air. Yes. A tear finally spilled over her lashes. I pushed you out, Sloan. And then I spent the next 12 years pretending you were the villain just so I could sleep at night. I stirred my coffee slowly. What exactly do you want from me today, Blair? Nothing. I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I just needed to say it. Out loud. No blaming Dad, no hiding behind Mom, no playing the victim. I sabotaged you because I was terrified of you. She looked me dead in the eye. I am so incredibly sorry. For years, I had believed that hearing Blair grovel would be the ultimate vindication. But sitting across from this tired, humbled woman, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a quiet sense of release. It's going to take me a long time to get past this, I told her. I know. We finished our coffees in relative silence, but for the first time in our lives, the silence didn't feel like a weapon. Over the next year, the ice slowly thawed. We started texting, occasionally nothing deep, just updates about her dog or my travel schedule. She told me about the grueling reality of corporate marketing. I told her about the headache of managing PE funds, We would never be the little girls playing hide and seek in the Greenwich mansion. That innocence was gone. But we were building something smaller, more fragile, and entirely honest. My parents adapted to their new life. My father joined a local walking club. My mother started volunteering at the botanical gardens. One afternoon, during a business trip to our Charlotte satellite office, my father stopped by. He sat in the guest chair and looked out the window at the North Carolina skyline. I was the one drowning it, he said out of nowhere. I didn't have to ask what he meant. The firm. It's hard for me to admit, he continued, rubbing his knuckles. When you bought it, I told myself you were just the executioner coming to finish the job. It took me a long time sitting in that condo to realize the ship was already at the bottom of the ocean, and I was the captain who drove it there. It was the first time in my life Vance Sterling had taken accountability without attaching a but to the end of the sentence. Thank you for saying that, Dad. I didn't say it when I should have. No, you didn't. And we can't rewind the clock. He nodded slowly. For the first time, he didn't argue. River Capital continued to scale. We backed visionary tech, took risks on unconventional founders, and ignored the old guard playbook. Sometimes we took hits, but when we won, we shifted entire industries. For the longest time, I thought what I wanted was revenge. I wanted Blair to look up at me from rock bottom. I wanted my father to choke on his own hubris. I wanted my mother to drown in her guilty silence. I got all of that. And then I realized I couldn't build a home inside a grudge. Buying Sterling wealth didn't erase the betrayal. Firing Blair didn't give me my 20s back. The apologies helped, but they didn't magically transform us into a Hallmark movie family. Blair still went off the grid sometimes. Then she'd send a text. Saw this article on AI chips. Thought of you. Hope you're good. I'd reply when I had time. My parents stopped offering unsolicited business advice. They just asked if I was eating well. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, I drove out to my parents' condo in Charlotte. I didn't bring expensive wine or legal contracts. My mother had a pot of coffee. Going. My father was complaining good-naturedly about his walking club. Blair arrived a few minutes later, carrying a box of scones from a local bakery. We sat around a small, scratched dining table a fraction of the size of mahogany monolith in Greenwich. Nobody brought up the stock market. Nobody asked for a loan. Nobody pretended we were something we weren't. When it was time to leave, my mother walked me to my car. She hugged me tightly. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I hugged her back. As I started the engine, I looked back at the condo. It wasn't impressive. There were no imported marble columns or crystal chandeliers. It was just a house. I didn't feel the need to walk through that door to prove my worth anymore. The door wasn't locked, but more importantly, I finally realized I didn't have to shrink myself to fit inside.